The term Russian tea has several meanings in the Russian language. For starters, it's worth noting that Russia did not originally cultivate the traditional tea plant. Instead, camellia plants were grown and tea was made from their leaves. The second meaning is associated with the unique Russian tradition of tea drinking and the long-standing love for Chinese tea. Besides, it was common practice in Russia to brew various herbs for medicinal purposes, with Ivan tea, or fireweed, otherwise known as rosebay willow herb, being particularly popular for centuries. Common folk, such as peasants, did not drink Chinese tea. First, it was expensive, and second, fragrant herbs with healing properties grew right outside their huts, in the fields and meadows. Peasants treated tea more as a remedy. When someone fell ill, tea was offered as a cure. Countess Sophia Tolstaya, wife of writer Leo Tolstoy, treated her household, family and peasants with medicinal herbs. For example, motherwort, mint and lavender worked well as sedatives, yarrow as a styptic. Bergenia was widely used as an anti-inflammatory, while betony generally aided in many women's ailments. In the 18th century, Russia consumed more tea than Europe, and the variety of foods that accompanied tea drinking was quite extensive. These included candies, bakery products, homemade sugar, honey and jam. Store-bought sugar was very expensive. Back in those days, some peculiar folk expressions emerged, such as vprikusku, which meant sipping tea through a lump of sugar, vnakladku, having tea with sugar poured into it, or vprigliadku, when you induced a sensation of sweetness on your tongue while drinking tea by contemplating a piece of sugar placed on a serving plate rather than in your mouth. Sugar heads were made from sugar beet that was processed, poured into cone-shaped molds that allowed all the liquid to drain. As a result, sugar compacted in those molds and was then wrapped in blue paper. Only a small pot of sugar protruded from the paper, resembling a swaddled baby. Hence the name, head, as it looked like an infant's head peeking out of the wrapping. Tea first arrived in the Russian Muscovian state during the reign of Tsar Michael I in the late 1630s. Interestingly, the word meaning tea in various modern languages reveals how tea reached this or that country. For instance, the English word tea comes from the southern Chinese coastal word te, indicating that tea arrived in England by sea on merchant ships. The Russian word chai comes from the northern Chinese word cha or ca, suggesting that tea was brought to Russia overland via caravans from northern China. For a long time, the border town of Kyakhta used to be the only center of tea trade between China and Russia. There was even a special Kyakhta language, a mixture of Russian, Chinese, Mongolian and Buryat words. Russians first had a chance to taste Chinese tea back in the 16th century, while exploring Siberia. Tea found its admirers at the royal court, serving not only as an exquisite treat, but also as a key remedy for melancholy. The author of books on housekeeping, Vasily Lovshin, once wrote, "The properties of this beverage are to clear vapors, purify and thin the blood. In the morning, it invigorates the spirits and appetite, while a few hours after lunch, it aids digestion." The lack of knowledge about brewing traditional Chinese tea gave rise to unique folk songs, one of which was popular across various provinces, capturing the essence of the time. Once my master sent me tea, told me, "Boil it up for me," but I've never known the way how to brew that tea, I say. In a rush, I grabbed a pot, tossed the tea in piping hot, onions, pepper, tossed them too. Parsley root, I thought would do. On the stove I let it steam, boiled it twice to make it gleam. For some flair, I thought with pride, let's add butter on the side. Scratched my head, I thought it through, what on earth did I not do? Then it hit me, plain and true, I forgot the salt, who knew? Indeed, no one explained to peasants how to brew tea properly. Here comes a parallel with the potato riots that erupted in the first half of the 19th century. Ignorant peasants shunned this foreign plant, since no one explained to them which part of it was edible. Instead of eating tubers, they often picked off leaves or even flowers, both of which are quite toxic. As a result, peasants often poisoned themselves. This led to uprisings, much like the confusion over tea. Peasants would take a large pot, boiled water in it, and then dumped 1 or 2 sacks of tea leaves into this boiling water. No wonder that the resulting brew had no appealing flavor whatsoever. And peasants were sincerely confused, as they could not understand why the nobility found the drink so good. Tea drinking sparked passions not only in Russia but also abroad. In 1773, the famous Boston Tea Party took place in the United States. This conflict served as a catalyst for the growing tensions between the American colonies and Great Britain that eventually led to the American Revolution. By 1795, tea had come into fashion, and during the 19th century, it completely replaced the old Russian drink known as sbiten, which was made with honey and spices. Since tea leaves were initially very expensive, the housewives of noble estates would store them in their bedroom dressers rather than in the pantry or kitchen. There was once a curious incident in the Penza province. One hostess decided to impress her guests with a refined dish. When the guests arrived, she appeared in the doorway of the tea room holding a large platter covered in tiny black grits scattered all over it, and said, "Well, I did my very utmost. I've rinsed them 6 times, but the water is still black." So she treated her guests to those black grits, and they could not understand why something so pricey could taste like that. There was also a national Russian beverage that posed serious competition to Chinese tea. It was a purely Russian drink called Koporsky tea, made from fireweed leaves, also known as Ivan tea. Ivan tea production dates back to the times of Catherine the Great. Though it was not mentioned in the late 18th century cookbooks, it spread rapidly. Koporsky tea became a real nuisance for merchants dealing in Chinese or Kyakhta tea. The people from the village of Koporye are believed to be the first to realize they could profit from harvesting fireweed. They stored this herb, then supplied it to Novgorod and later to St. Petersburg and Moscow. Some claimed that only tea from Koporye was served at the Tsar's table, attributing its unique flavor to the local soil. For a long while, at least until the mid-19th century, tea was an expensive luxury in Russia, and common people could not generally afford real tea from China. Crafty merchants, however, came up with all sorts of tricks to boost their sales, mixing in whatever they could. They added leaves, twigs, or sometimes just grass plucked from the ground. They even mixed in shotgun pellets. When brewed, the heavier pellets would sink to the bottom, while the light ingredients floated on top. Koporsky tea was sour and cheap, but was traded much like Chinese tea. Actually, merchants would blend Koporsky tea with Chinese tea. At times, they were adding something other than Ivan tea. Despite its high price tag, the cost price of this product was much cheaper. By the early 19th century, Ivan tea had become so widespread that it challenged the tea trade in Russia. Anti-counterfeiting measures were taken by the cabinet of ministers and even by the Tsar himself, with decrees in 1816 and 1819 prohibiting the collection of firewood and the sale of drinks made from it. Moscow merchants made great fortunes from the tea trade, including the Perelov family. Back in 1787, the Perelovs founded a tea trade business in the rows of the Red Square, the predecessor of today's GUM shopping center. In 1887, Tsar Alexander III ennobled the Perelov family, elevating them from the merchant class to the ranks of the aristocracy. The coat of arms of these newly minted nobles featured the twigs and leaves of the tea plant, symbolizing their contributions to the development of the tea trade in Russia. Tea, especially strong black tea, called for something sweet to go with, which in turn helped boost the confectionery business. Initially, nearly all the confectioners in St. Petersburg and Moscow were French or Italian immigrants who came to Russia seeking work. In the times of Mikhail Lermontov, a romantic writer and poet, candies were considered a luxury. They were made by private confectioners who kept their recipes secret. There were amusing stories told in the town of Penza about a stingy rich woman whose surname was Kozhina. She was the grandmother of Yekaterina Sushkova, the muse of Lermontov's love poems. Once a year, she would host a ball on her name day. The only sweets served at the event were those she had collected throughout the year from other balls, for which she always carried a large purse. In Moscow, it was common to seek out some delicacies, be it at Filipov's bakery or Abrikosov's confectionery, famous for its fudge. As for chocolate, it could only be ordered from Aynem. I find myself staring at this plate of dried biscuits known as sushki. In many letters, there were requests to bring sushki with goosebumps, meaning those topped with poppy seeds. Yevgenia Chekhova, the mother of writer Anton Chekhov, was very fond of halva. In the town of Taganrog, it was called alva, and the writer often received letters from her reminding him not to forget to buy alva for his mother. Composer Karl Feldman created more than 200 musical pieces in the early 20th century. But the most delightful and fanciful were the sweet dances of the Aynem confectionery, including Bluebird Caramel Waltz, Fruit Drops Waltz, Cupcake Gallop, Cocoa Dance, and Chocolate Waltz. This music was not meant to arouse deep thoughts or strong feelings. This was to serve as background music in tea shops and candy stores. In the second half of the 19th century, tea drinking spread across all classes of Russian society, and a network of cheap tea houses emerged. These places were often used by revolutionaries to spread their socialist propaganda. Of course, the authorities did not sit idle. The police frequently shut down such rat holes, and low-ranking officials made good money in these spots. At that time, people could not write petitions to government offices themselves. Officials, even minor ones, were not only literate, but also very experienced in drafting all kinds of official documents. These officials would often sit in cheap tea houses, writing petitions to official institutions and chancelleries on behalf of those who couldn't do it themselves, in exchange for a fee. The tea ceremony spawned an entire array of related accessories, including tea sets, rinsing bowls, and tea caddies. Note that the tea caddy is made of glass, but has a brass lid. The lid served as a measure for how much tea to brew. Tea was expensive, so only small amounts were brewed at a time. It was considered bad form to drink more than 3 cups. Drinking tea from a saucer and blowing on it to cool it down was also considered bad manners. Originally, turning a cup upside down signaled the end of the tea ceremony and that the guest wouldn't drink anymore. But after the military campaign of 1812, a new tradition emerged, placing a spoon in the cup to indicate the end of tea drinking. Adding a drop of strong drinks, such as rum or cognac, to tea became another feature of the tea ceremony. At Tsarskoye, we found Mayoshka, having a feast, which ended with making the indispensable zhenka punch. And naked hussar sabers played their part. With their innocent blades, they served as stands for sugarheads, doused with rum and blazing with a magnificent blue fire, poetically illuminating the dining room where all the candles and carcel lamps were removed for the sake of effect. Traditionally, tea in Russia was supposed to be strong. Pyotr Vyazemsky, a famous poet of the golden age of Russian poetry, who went into voluntary exile and lived in the Penza province for 2 years, once wrote in his poem, "The hour of friendly chats around the tea is near. To the young hostess, honor, praise, and cheer. Not in the German way, a brew so thin and pale, but Russian tea, rich, strong with flavors that prevail. A hearty amber stream that warmly fills the air. With every drop, a taste of Russia's soul to share." The Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky always liked to drink his tea from a glass with a silver cup holder. His wife Anna recalled that after he had poured his tea, he often retired to his study. but would suddenly return and say, "Look, the color is wrong." So he would add more brew or boiling water. Sometimes he would do it time after time. The writer could come and go as he tried to get the exact color he wanted. There are memories of the maid of honor, Anna Tyutcheva, about the salon of the Karamzins, where Mikhail Lermontov spent much of his time. As a treat there, they served very strong tea with thick cream and fresh buttered bread. At the beginning of the evening, Sofia, the daughter of Nikolai Karamzin, brought people into comfortable groups. She had a talent for ensuring that each guest, naturally and as if by chance, found themselves in the company of someone who suited them best. In Arseniev's house, there was a separate room for the tea ceremony. Of course, not every family could afford this, but in manor houses, there was often a separate tea table in the dining room. Of course, you could enjoy tea anywhere, in the living room, in the dining room, or in a separate tea room. Everyone would gather at a round table with a huge steaming samovar, smoke pipes, and talk about literature and art. Samovar, an original Russian word, a symbol of Russian tea drinking, was an integral part of the tea ceremony in the 19th century, as it is today. Historically, the samovar had many names. In the dictionary of Vladimir Dal, there are such words as samovarets and even samodur, and the people of Vyatka called it samogray, while the people of Kursk referred to it as samokipets. The samovar was praised by Pyotr Vyazemsky, who wrote, "Where is the samovar, our home's beloved glow, our altar in the house where blessings overflow? It bubbles with the tales of our bygone days, and memories of Russia in its steam still blaze. It stood the test of time through fragments of the past, a flame that still endures for grandkids built to last. Though clumsy and askew, it stands with Russian pride, warm and full within, though plain on the outside. It holds the heat so well, and as its hum takes flight, our words begin to flow like water bubbling bright." There were two main centers of samovar production in Russia, the Urals and the Tula province. In the 20th century, the production of samovars in the Urals diminished, while the Tula region is still the main center of their production, perhaps even worldwide. In the foreground, there's a serving table with a bouillotte, a special device like a teapot on the stand, used to keep tea hot throughout the evening. Water was boiled in a samovar and poured into a bouillotte. There was either a spirit light or a candle underneath, and the temperature was maintained throughout the evening to keep the tea hot. Bouillottes came in various types and shapes. There were even bouillottes with a strainer for brewing coffee. For example, we have a bouillotte here. The person who donated it said that his grandmother used it to brew medicinal herbs. The method of brewing tea, using 2 or even 3 teapots, was introduced by the famous Prince Alexander Kurakin, who was ambassador to Paris during the Napoleonic era. He was nicknamed the Diamond Prince for his love of adorning himself with a large number of precious stones. Drinking tea with lemon, often called Russian tea, was a unique Russian tradition unmatched anywhere in the world. This fashion appeared in the 19th century when Russian merchants started adding a slice of lemon to tea. It is remarkable that in Russia, tea is not only drunk but also eaten, and they used to say, "Tea is served." This ritual emphasizes the special place that tea holds in the Russian culture. Tea is not just a drink, but part of a refined social gathering. There is a well-known story about Prince Shahovskoy meeting Goethe in 1802 in one of the Munich hotels. The poet invited the prince to tea, but Shahovskoy, seeing nothing on the table but tea, immediately ordered sandwiches and pastry. They spent the evening in pleasant conversations about German and Russian literature. The next day, to Shahovskoy's surprise, he received a bill for everything he had eaten. Having invited Shahovskoy only for tea, Goethe refused to pay. Tea in Russia is not just about the drink itself, it's about how we communicate. While drinking tea, we would talk about art and literature. Tea gatherings became a setting where Russian romances were born. Even today, important agreements are signed and crucial issues are resolved over tea. Tea has become integral to how we live today.